Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, Les, your voice, I think maybe not switched on.
You're on mute, Les.
Well, interesting. He was talking to us, Jane, up until very recently.
We did practice this earlier. It will all be fine. Hi, Jill. It's a big green button at the bottom, Les.
Right, unclick that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
There we go then.
Well done. Okay. All
Big
right.
green button at the bottom.
Yes, I don't seem to have one of those anymore. Can you see my first slide?
No, we're not. You're not sharing your screen. Waggle your cursor at the bottom and you'll get the bar back up.
Go back to there. Go full screen. See? And click on the one you want to share, Les.
Lovely. That's all
There we
absolutely
are.
fine. Super.
Jolly good.
Take it away.
I shall start then.
Yes, please.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, country house, lend me your labour. Thanks to Becky Haslam for that title. Largely, this is going to be about excavations we carried out in Cranford Park in West London in Hillingford, co-funded by Hillingdon Borough Council and the Heritage Lottery Fund, which meant we had volunteers. I think the youngest was 2, although technically how much she did any actual digging could be debatable, and the oldest was in their 90s. A mixture of school children, retired people, weekenders, people who've taken holiday off work to come along and either learn archaeology for the first time or reinforce their archaeological skills. There are friends of Cranford House as well. We had some of those along. And volunteers who've been digging with us in the London Borough of Hillingdon since 2012, when we did a site at Eastcote, which some of you may remember me talking about at Lammas before. So, well, I try and move on to a next slide. Sorry, I need tech help at home.
Yeah.
There we are. As it says there, losing the will to get it right. So the London Borough of Hillingdon Council got funding from the National Heritage Lottery Fund for a community-based project, largely based around a new cafe they were constructing on the site of a house called Cranford House, which was owned by the Berkeley family, one of the richest families in the country, when they bought the land in the 17th century. They owned Berkeley Castle, some of which you know about. I believe Berkeley Square is named for them, and the Berkeley Hunt is also something that they'd enjoy. It is said that they could travel from their castle in the Gloucestershire area all the way to London without leaving their land. And I think Heathrow was built on their land, and a lot of Hillingdon was their land, and Hounslow Heath just bordered their land. So AOC Archaeology, who I work with and have been there since 1996, we were appointed as the archaeological consultant to work in the borough and bring community archaeology projects as part of the development stage for the HLF bid. So in 2021, 2022, 2023, and this year, 2024, we did area archaeology, and in 2018, 19 and 20, we were more doing things in advance of the cafe being constructed, which is yet to be finished, but that's a matter for the council and the builders to discuss. When we've all finished, if you want to look up what we've done and seen all the records, it'll of course be on the Oasis website and the finds archived with the Museum of London under the site code CAP18. So I'll just start. If there's any volunteers who have joined us, thanks for coming, but we had over 100 people. And rather than just name 1 or 2, I shan't name any of you. That would be unfair. So first off, we had to, well, why do we do archaeology? There are limited remains, so archaeology of known historic sites need to be recorded. We also do archaeology to find the unknown, and that's where the joy of geophysics can come in. Or we completely disregard the geophysics because it's not always successful and be successful in our own archaeology. Engaging local public's always fun. Being a public park would get people just walking past or walking their dogs and saying, "What are you up to? Oh, that's interesting. Can we join in?" Although most people registered and joined in, we're happy just to take people who turned up, walk-ins, if you like. And personally, I think it helps people appreciate the progress of culture, helps them interact with the past. After all, some of us are archaeologists in this meeting and touch artifacts 2,000 years old every day. But I certainly recall the first picking up of finds and going, no one's touched this for 3,000 years. Of course, when you're little, something 30 years old is ancient. We, of course, interacted with the local community. Every year I've done a local talk to the Eastcote and Ruislip History Society. I'm sure there's another part of that. Learn to study. And of course, it's great being outside in the mud, in the sun, whatever the weather. And the last reason for doing archaeology, well, why not? Now, for any of you who aren't clear on where the site is, this is a picture of Cranford Park. That's a big green thing in the middle. The M4 motorway crosses at the top. And there's a main road, the A312, leading down to the A4 at the bottom of the picture. So Cranford Park is right in the centre. The house was near the top, near where the motorway is, and there's a church of St Dunstan's, which is 14th century, which is still extant. The house is no longer with us. It went in 1945 after the war, but the stables are still there. If I zoom in quietly, you can see our main areas of excavation. So trenches around the house, it's our yellow area. A lot of busy archaeology in the parkland in our red area. And the latest thing that we dug this year was looking for an ice house, which I've highlighted in blue there in the middle of a stand of trees. We tried to find the ice house, and it just wasn't happening until the last day but two of our dig this year, when we extended and went along and down and along and down and eventually find it. And that'll be one of my last slides. So this is what the parkland looks like. That's a nice crisp early winter day, January, I think, which is when we did our geophysics across as much of the land as possible. Near the house, which is a brick building, got lots of dark signals on the geophysics indicating brick rubble, as you might expect. And there's also cellars surviving from the 16 and 1700s, which are now part of the new cafe, which has been constructed on top. So we looked around the house, looked around the churchyard, and surveyed the pasture to the south. If I turned round and had this photograph in the opposite direction, you'd see ridge and furrow surviving from the medieval period. But this is land that was all turned over during the Second World War as part of the Dig for Victory campaign, which is why it looks so smooth. With there's just no undulations at all. There no visible crop marks, no earthworks. So this is a geophysical plan of that area, and the little red trenches, the red rectangles, are where we did archaeology this year, last year, and the year before. The big black areas are bits of trees where we couldn't survey. The bit on the right is the River Crane. The long signal going through the middle was a pipeline that was watched by the Museum of London in around 2004. And in the manner of pipeline archaeology, they didn't have time to let the archaeology weather out, and they didn't actually find anything. So we targeted what looked like ditches. You see those lines up near the top of the screen by the small, thin rectangle. Those turned out to be medieval boundaries between plots of land, so part of the ridge and furrow. And then there's not a lot going on in where I've got our bigger rectangles, although possibly we're seeing a ditch coming in there on the top right of the big rectangle and the top right of the smaller square that's attached to it. because of what we found in the big rectangle in 2023, we decided to have a little go next to it, see what was going on there. But this does not reflect the features that we found, which I think I've got written on the next slide as, on one of the next slides. I'll just do a little bit about the background. Why might there be archaeology? That's always something to look at. There's the Imperial College Sports Ground, which has Mesolithic archaeology. There's Neolithic periods and ditches and henge-type monuments. There's a Bronze Age round barrow in the park and cremation, stock enclosures. And at Cranford Park, part of that watching brief for the pipeline did record a Bronze Age rubbish pit and cooking pit. And quite significantly, the Western International Market site recorded many features from early Neolithic to Bronze Age and Iron Age. One of my favourite pictures is this, the cursors at Heathrow Airport. We could argue that they put the short people in the ditches, but I think it does give a marvellous cross-section of the feature that's easier to see with people standing across the ditch and mound of the cursors itself. You really get an idea of the scale there. And it's, how long is it? It's about 2 kilometers long. It's some ridiculous length, the Stanwell cursus. So what did we find? Well, in our first little test trenches, a little post hole, a fence line, a gully, 3 post holes. That's all part of one trench, just cloudy in one photograph, not in the next. And we thought, if you find that in your test area, let's have a look at another test area. Back in 2022, more post holes, more ditches, more post holes. It just looked like there was a lot going on. I'll go through these quite quickly because they're all the same: ditch, ditch, ditch. So when it came to the end of our excavations out in that field, in an area, the bigger area was 30 meters by 10. The small area was 10 meters square. So the 400 square meters, 455 post holes, 12 ditches, 2 pits, over 200 sherds of pottery, 3 flint tools, 50 pieces of debitage. The big pot, there's an online picture of how we wish our pottery finds looked, and at the bottom is a picture of how 4 of our pottery finds actually looked. Everything was very broken up, and we think most of it is Romano-British in character, maybe late Iron Age, maybe possibly Saxon, but we can consider that later. This is only a preliminary report. We haven't got all the specialist reports in, but the more Roman finds, sort of household storage vessels, some were imports, some were a lot more solid and larger pieces of the finer pottery than the more coarse, what we might consider typical Romano-British tempered wares. Here are some of our volunteers getting to understand what post holes are doing. So we're actually in the process of cleaning back to find what we were hoping would be a row of post holes. AOC staff in the high-vis and volunteers of, as you can see there, all sizes, all as in height, and all ages, and all with sensible sun hats and mostly long-sleeved clothing, and no one wants to get sunburnt. On this site, we could not see, after a couple of days of sun, any features, nothing at all. But with the eye of faith and the skill with the trowel that even this little 5-year-old, you can see in the foreground, not Jill on the floor, but the 5-year-old behind her, you can actually feel the difference between the fill of a post hole and the natural ground. And once, of course, you start finding finds in what you think might be a post hole, then we could guarantee everything. In doing my cross sections of post holes, I like to do them all the same way, facing the sun, or south is best, because then when you take a photograph, you get an even level of light and you get an even view of the post holes. So you can look at every half section from the same angle, and it actually helps see what's going on photographically and from a distance. This is this year. We've got some of our regular volunteers. We've got a married couple there, Jill, and there's Rosemary on the right. She came every year, and Rosemary, for me, satisfied one great archaeological truth, which is every time you visit the British Museum, you'll meet someone you know. But anyway, in the foreground there, we can see a slot through a Roman period ditch. This was ridiculously full of finds. It's household tablewares, storage wares, cooking vessels. Hardly any animal bone. I suspect the soil isn't good for it, but the sheer quantity of large fragments of Roman pottery in there of various types and various sorts and various sources, including, I think, 1 or 2 fragments of Samian pottery, tell us that there's certainly Roman dwelling in the distance. You may see a sort of rectilinear arrangement of post holes there, dominating the ground with smaller stake holes between. That is a house of sorts, a rectangular house, and we can archaeologically prove that that is later than the infilled Roman ditch because one of the post holes of the nearest straight line cuts straight through the fill of the ditch. There is a second house in there that we can't quite see because we looked at it and went back and not all the post holes of this one rectangular house made sense. So we had a look for another. This was the previous year, as you can see, a large quantity of post holes. In the centre right of the photo, you might be able to make out a small rectangular building. We think that could be of Saxon date, and Cranford itself does have Saxon origins. It was moved off the site when the rich Barclays moved in the 17th century, who thought the local village unsightly, I believe, which happened to a lot of land. In the centre of the picture where I've got a couple of scale bars, that's actually a couple of roundhouses there overlapping one another. So they could be 20 years apart, they could be 100 years apart, they could be 200 years apart. As I said about the finds, they're generally very small and there's no surviving floor surfaces. And I think they were lost to the Dig for Victory campaign during the Second World War. But all we could do is plot the post holes, collect all the finds, take samples as necessary, and have a look at the overview. My pottery specialists tell me that without diagnostic rim forms and patterning and decoration, Bronze Age, local Iron Age, and Saxon pottery can look very similar. So we'll wait and see what comes out of it. This is our first GPS scan of the area, of the larger area from last year. We have the beginnings of a roundhouse at the top of the picture. This trench is 10 meters wide and 30 meters long. So that curve at the top is about 6 meters diameter. Our roundhouses that overlap are actually down towards the bottom of the image between the 2 ditch slots, which are coloured light blue there. I've added some interpretation later on. This is another view of our 2 roundhouses together. It wasn't making sense when I was plotting it. I was ending with one oval house with some random post holes in between. But then I looked at it sensibly. Who builds an oval house? And once viewing it as 2 roundhouses with I don't know if my cursor shows up, with one coming round here and the second one within it, 2 roundhouses, again, both of about 5.5 meters diameter. They seem to have internal posts to support a roof structure. So the external posts, I think, are holding a wall. The inner posts are supporting the roof. So it's not one of those roundhouses that only has the external ones. It's external posts hold the wall, internal ones support a roof structure. And we think in this one that the door was facing east. I'm very much a view of this as a practical idea of having your door facing east. It's nothing to do with sunlight. It's nothing to do with not worshipping the dark. It's just downhill is that way. And when it rains, water won't come in the front door. In this case, I think it's as simple as that. I'm not dismissing the ideas of ritual, but Here's another view of these roundhouses. One over there and another one overlapping it. Clearly, these could not have existed at the same time, but it doesn't mean that they're not literally 1 year apart in time. They, as I said, they could be 200 years apart in time. At the north end, not so clear. We did see that on plan, but there was very few finds in that one that we first saw at the top of that screen. So I'm thinking maybe animal pen rather than house now. Not every structure has to be a roundhouse. Then we have a little look at that rectangular building that I mentioned. Coming here, coming this way, coming down here. At the moment, I suspect this to be a small Saxon building with regular posts quite close together and planking, and then a ridge held up by posts running down the centre. Of course, when you've got over 400 post holes, you can make whatever patterns you like, but I think these are so clearly part of the same thing, and these are some of the posts that we found in our test trenches in 2022. There's another view of the same thing. It's so clearly a rectangular structure. Moving on to this year, our 2024 dig in August. I have to say sorry to Gethin, and someone stood next to him. I see him to have chopped his body off, but you can see we're trying to do our best to be tidy, talking to the children, showing them finds. Well, I'm taking photographs of our 10-metre square hole from this year. Here's a second rectangular building. This is the one here that is cut by the Roman ditch, if you can see my cursor. I said there was another house, and that is a roundhouse. And this runs around here. Obviously, roundhouses don't run. The circuit of post holes makes a circle there, and inside there are 6 larger ones, very much like the 2 roundhouses that we dug the previous year, and I interpret this as supporting the roof. Again, no surviving floor. But once this was allowed to dry, within the walls, the ground was actually a lot harder than outside the walls, and the post hole fills were softer still. So although we have no floor, we're probably getting the result of compaction leading us to a hard area of land within the property. There's another view of the post holes. We found the bigger rectangular one first. So having plotted those out and stake holes in between, presumably for holding our walling materials, wattle, probably daubed, we could then realise that the ones that don't make sense, coming round in a curve, cut straight through the middle. So even if we didn't have dating evidence, we can say these are of 2 different periods. You can't have 2 houses of different shapes, one on top of each other, being extant together. Here's another view of our longish house. It's about 4 meters wide and about 7 meters long. We are missing posts here, so I was kind of thinking doorway, but I'm going to have to study other reports and other available sources to try and interpret this building. Does it have more in common with a dwelling, or does it have more in common with a sort of animal shelter, or both? Is it animals at one end and people at the other? Once we look at the finds, we should know more. What was nice that most of these post holes had pottery fragments in, and when we cleaned the inside, we got iron nails around this end of the building. I think 6 or 7 around the posts here. So I'm not convinced that we had hinges from a door, but we might have nails from nailing planks onto the inside or outside of the structure. Once these are x-rayed, we'll know more. So interpreting the north part, so these post holes make one small thing there. This is about 7 meters across. That's a bit large for a post hole. At the moment, I'm not sure what the others are doing. Sometimes you get post holes and you can't put them all together. You can't make it up. But anyone's willing to try. If you want to print this screen when it's up online and join the dots and tell me that I've missed something, I'm more than willing to learn. So I think that the round houses are probably not of a phase with that rectangular one, just because they cut each other in our second trench. And at the other end, here's our two overlapping roundhouses in there. Little ditch there, little ditch there. Our rectangular house from last year, our rectangular house from this year, the roundhouse from this year, and the Roman ditch that was on one of those early slides that we proved was cut by a post hole of this long rectangular house. So I'm tentatively ascribing another squarish structure down here to the same phase, and maybe a fence line and a rectangular thing, all suggesting a series of rectangular houses at a different phase to the series of round houses. But I'm not convinced that we can say that they're definitely Saxon and not later Roman period buildings. The finds will tell us. I cannot go on form alone. Here's a picture from Butser, just to like inspire you with a group of roundhouses and rectangular ones at the same time. There on the right. So moving on to medieval and Tudor Cranford, I will crack on because we're down to about 20 minutes, quarter an hour. Cranford probably developed as a settlement prior to the Norman invasion, held by one Thurston, a thane of King Edward. In 1200, now this is relevant, the manor of Cranford was divided into two. Cranford St. John is the site that we're on in Cranford Park. Cranford St. Mott lay to the north, and that still has its Mott and Bailey extant, although it's got a group of travelling folk parked on it at the moment. We'd like to dig that. Everyone would like to dig that. I think it had 2 1 by 1 metre trenches dug on it in 1970, and that's the only thing that's happened there. But we did find what we think is one of the Cranford St. John building. That would be the Knights of St. John, of course, because we got some decent medieval bricks, window glass, medieval pottery, and cames from the lead, that's a lead lining from around the windows. And we know that the 15th century church of St. Dunstan still stands, and the village was moved from its site around the church when the park was created in the 17th century. The Knights of St. John building was superseded by a building of Tudor style, which the Berkeley family moved into. They were favourites, I think, of the Carolingian kings. Here's an ancient plan that shows the Tudor house with its bay windows and a group of stables at the rear. And we dug a trench, we think, which is represented by, well, we know we dug a trench. We dug a trench that is represented by this light blue rectangle. And that's what we found in there. We have an early wall. This is made of medieval bricks with medieval finds in the construction trench and scattered all around it. And we think this dates to the period of the Knights of St. John, so Cranford St. John. That is then cut by walls of Tudor date, and here is one of those. You recall in that drawing I just showed you that there was walls on this wall there and a drain here. This is the drain's actually one of my favourite things. I'm going to step outside Cranford. Drains are brilliant, always turn stones over. We were doing a site near Barking Abbey, and I had a recent archaeologist who hadn't done much before, and when they removed the stones from the drain, they didn't turn them over. I said, "Did you turn them over?" They said, "No." I turned one over, and there was graffiti of a sailing ship on the other side, and it probably came from a graffiti scrawled or drawn on Barking Abbey in the 15th century. Anyway, moving on, I like this drain because of this stone down here at the bottom. This is a piece of Reigate stone, but it's been finished to look like ornamental wooden panelling. And I think that's a fascinating detail of a piece of stone which must have come off the Knights of St. John building in order to be reused as a drain cap with these other peg tiles and roughly triangular shaped stones, capping a brick drain of Tudor date. So as I typically do in these stories, this is what our medieval pottery sherds would have made were they complete. No, this is what we're picking up at Cranford, these tiny little pieces. We keep working in these big rich houses and we never find their rubbish pits. Perhaps they're not having rubbish pits. Perhaps they're just discarding the rubbish and strewing it across the land. Perhaps they're just mixing their rubbish in with their manure and then manuring. A little bit of the Berkeley family. I don't want to dwell too long on it, but Lady Elizabeth, the first Berkeley to own the manor, was a cousin of Queen Elizabeth I, and she purchased Cranford St John in 1618. I know that's after Elizabeth died, but they reunited the estate. Then her son George had the house built at Cranford Park. The house was remodelled, and then again in the 1790s by the fifth Earl, who had a scandalous marriage to a butcher's daughter called Mary Cole. And she was apparently worried about getting taken away for having a scandalous marriage. And of course, she had a tunnel dug so she could escape. We've never found the tunnel. No one's ever found the tunnel. There probably isn't a tunnel. They had a stable block. I say if you need to escape the people who are coming for you, get on a horse. Don't go hiding down tunnels. We had a look at the archives for Cranford House, and this is a sketch drawn in around 1892, showing a 3-story house with some bay windows on the end and a ha-ha wall in front and gardens. What you can't see is this had cellars. Our second historic picture looks pretty much like the first, and I suspect it's just a coloured version copied of the same thing. It's almost the same. There are early photos. This is, as it says, from Highways and Byways of Middlesex in 1909. And again, you see the 3 stories, bays at the end, and a little projecting entrance with a Georgian-style portico at the front, big French windows on the ground floor, sash windows all over. If this definitely had 16th century origins, but these sash windows are far more 18th century in style, and it looks really like it's been rendered over and scored, so it looks modern and Georgian rather than made of brick and 17th century. We did find parts of these gates, parts of railings. This entrance portico has pillars on the outside, but it seems when it was demolished in 1945, some things were just shoved into the basement, some things were taken away. This is what the Ordnance Survey of 1914 shows us. The church, Cranford House, as this sort of L-shaped building, a stable area behind, greenhouses to the northwest. The motorway now runs straight across the top of the park, and in a little patch of woodland it says Ice House, with a funny sort of keyhole-shaped structure there. Bit of a clue there to where we might find the Ice House. Again, picture from the air, shortly after demolition. The stables are here, the church is there, the house is gone. It was lived in during the war just by one caretaker, and the house became so derelict he just stayed in the downstairs room with one fireplace, and his grandson came to see us while we were digging, which was great because, again, you can get these first-hand experiences, or at least second-hand stories from his grandfather. One thing I learnt at this site is don't talk to children under 10 about the ghosts who live there, because some of them turn green and feel faint. There aren't any ghosts, by the way. This is a map of the cafe that's going on. It's roughly over the footprint of the old building, so we can see the bay windows marked there, the curving entrance and the servants' swing. But this new cafe overlies the cellars that are still there and were built in the 17th century, enlarged in the 18th century. Here's a plan of the cellars from the RCHME. They're a great resource, the RCHME. I believe they became the Ministry of Works, which then became English Heritage. It's not totally accurate. I don't think they had the time or the well, measuring devices which we have, because my plan was slightly different, and I could spot that our earliest phase is a patch in the middle made of one sort of brick from one manufacturer. Second phase, purple additions, a second type of manufacturer, a third manufacturer with our orange phase, and then in the 19th century, a second stair down to the basements and holding a toilet block. The typical Victorian zeal of adding toilets to everything they do. And some of the basement had windows which would have allowed natural light in. It's probably being used as wine cellars and storage cellars. There's also one ice house off there. Why they needed a second ice house is not entirely clear. Here are some views of the cellars. I've been down there, got to go down there before any remediation works, because this is going to be part of the cafe. When the cafe is finished, any visitors will be able to go down there and enjoy their tea and cakes amongst the 17th century arches. Lovely things, solid stone blocks supporting the freestanding arches in the middle of the underground spaces, solid brick walls on the outside, and really quite nicely chamfered and smooth bricks there. I don't think they're molded that shape. I think they're cut by the masons and then smoothed with sandpaper or whatever equivalent they'd have had in the 17th century. Some later additions, these are yellow stock bricks, added shelving, and these numbers were there on the walls. 1, 2, 3, 4 also exist. They're further on this way, and the numbering goes up to 16 on the opposite side. Whether this is storing foodstuffs or wine bottles, it's not entirely clear. That there have been changes is obvious from this blocked opening with the straight joint in the wall. Again, numbered locations in the room, which I suspect helps the servants find things. Also, in the cellar, we've got these little black smudges, and this we think is where candles were put. Not necessarily by the people living in the house. This was derelict for a few years. It could have been by teenagers just playing and putting candles on, and that's where the soot came from. But some of the cellars did collapse. There's a tale of a girl falling into the cellars in the 1970s and being lost for a week. And it's just someone walking their dog, hearing some plaintive calls that she was eventually found. And after that, I think they were made more secure. You get an idea of the size of these. This photographic stick is 1 meter long. So these are about 4 feet tall before the arches spring off. And the floor is entirely brick as well. As I said, some of it has fallen down, and all this is rubble has collapsed, and builders or demolition experts were employed in 2022 to empty all this out, and now it is, you see, it's a bit, everything's been pushed down there. I think there are sills and bits from the upstairs thrown into the cellar in a handy hole during the demolition. This is the kitchen, the downstairs kitchen, which now looks more like that, having had the rubble taken out. Lovely little fireplace and storage areas, little cubby holes on the right. We also had to test the top of the arches. This is what the top of the arches look like, because these bear the weight of the new cafe. And it's just rubble packed into the spaces above the pillars. Lots of modern finds, lots of cockle shells, strangely lots of tarmac, because the house was knocked down above this, and I think they just got whatever was spare from after the war or from the war damage in 1945 and levelled the ground over the rubble. We had a bit of a poke round the house. There's the sill from a French window, and we're looking at a blocked up window in the basement level there. Got some volunteers here. The trouble of sunshine, it's all very well having a nice clean site, but when you've got shadows like this, it's terrible. But we're looking again at the north end, north over here through this arch of that medieval wall of the Knights of St. John, but then we've got the entrance to Cranford House with a couple of little stones to stop carriage wheels from crashing into the entrance. We've got foundations exposed as the new cafe was going in. They scraped off all the rubble and basically tarmac and just dumped materials, and we're able to have a look at what was left of the flooring. Not a lot. Another French window step there, found in 2022. On the left of this slide, we've got an area of collapsed cellar with a doorway there, and this is what it looked like once clean. Good job by the builders. It's just a pity the cafe isn't open yet. One of the few examples of the floor, so polished limestone, very fine grained, flags there with little square marble inlays, but what you see is pretty much all there was of the floor, just this very small area with a half-meter scale there, showing that there's not a lot surviving. Another shot of the entrance, I mentioned it in that previous slide, with these little rounded blocks here. I'm not sure what they're called in Lincolnshire. I think they call them glinters, but there's sunken bollards that stop the carriage wheels from crashing into the house proper, because what we see in this York stone paving are the scars, these rounded areas of the pillars of the porch. And I can prove that because elsewhere on the site are a couple of those pillars and they fit. So here we are again, the porch, perhaps more properly pilasters, in that they're bound into the frontage, this curving frontage, which was shown on the old photographs and paintings. And here's one of such things stored around the back of the stable block. That fits exactly on one of the scars there on the entrance slabs. Now, people saying, where's the tunnel? Where's the tunnel? Well, in the woods near the house, there is a raised mound that runs for about 100 meters and lies about 1 meter above the surviving landscape. So we had a look between the ha-ha and the house at this ridge, and it just seems to be made of rubble. We've looked and we've looked. There's also an arched opening blocked up in the ha-ha, which could lead to the cellars for a tunnel. So some bricks were taken out of that, and it was just more like, I don't want to say a grotto, perhaps more of a gardener's store, so that the Barclays wouldn't have to see the gardener's tools on their land. Effectively, they got a shed hidden in the ha-ha. Is there a tunnel? No. So this year, the last thing we did was look for an ice house. My picture on the right's gone very wrong. Let's look at the one on the left. This ice house was 70 centimeters down. That's about 2.5 foot in old measurements. And there's the curving wall. The ice house is exactly where it said it would be according to the Ordnance Survey plans. So Ordnance Survey plans, brilliant for things that are still there in the 20th century. Geophysics shows up some archaeology, but none of those post holes, which is a bit of a surprise. So what next? Well, we'll write the post-excavation report from all 7 years of excavations with reports from our find specialists. We'll carry on doing talks to the local people. And I'd just like to thank HLF if there's anyone from there watching, such as Paul McGarity, who was so helpful, works at the park, the London Borough of Hillingdon, Friends of Cranford Park, and all volunteers, if any of you have joined tonight. And that is me, and I will take questions.
Thank you, Les. That was, oh dear, sorry, light in the wrong place. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm deeply envious of all those finds. Claps and cheers are coming in. I'm going to, actually, no, I'll leave the recording on for the questions because I'm sure they will be very interesting. So let us see what we have. Right. We have a question. Why do you think Cranford Park was a good place for early settlement and indeed for the later house?
There's the River Crane, is a very handy river. It provides fresh water. It floods every year, even now, so I imagine it would get refreshed with nutritional soil, but soil with nutrients in that is then good for grassland, good for wheat, good for raising cattle, good for raising sheep. And we did find fragments of baked clay objects, which I strongly suspect are loom weights. So I think it's just brilliant farmland, as is most of the Thames Valley and the floodplain thereof.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we've seen further upstream in the Thames Valley on the gravels. I think, as you say, the inundation and the rich soils there make it.
And look at the Lee Valley, similar kind of flat landscape, and wasn't that the cucumber growing centre of Eastern England, I think, in the Victorian period, for example?
I will defer to your knowledge on that one. I'm a bit better on the Bronze Age. We have no additional we have another. We have Did your volunteer workforce prefer working on the prehistoric sites or on the much later, the big house, which is very different archaeology to work on?
Most volunteers find it easier and more rewarding to clean brickwork because it looks like something when you've cleaned a section. And there's certainly some who requested to work on brickwork and stonework. But once, and that's easily something to find. A lot of volunteers focus on the finds. I found a piece of pottery, they say, or I found a flint. But once they find a post hole, okay, I found a post hole. But once they find 2 or 3, they can suddenly say, I've actually found part of a building. And that's the second stage of learning. If doing archaeology, stage 1 is cleaning with the trowel. Stage 2 is digging with the trowel. Interpreting what you're finding, stage 1 is finding a find, but stage 2 is putting a group of features together. It's a bit of a mix.
I'm very glad to hear it being much more prehistoric focused myself. So I'm glad that they got a good experience on the post holes. Right.
It's remarkable they found it easy. Once you find one and it sounds odd. Once you believe that what you're doing is right. But if you've got 2 post holes, where's the third one? That's the second question.
Unless it was an early ritual bench. We have a new question from Chris. Is there a nearby Roman road?
The Roman road to Bath would be roughly on the route of the A4, coming out of, let's hazard a guess and say Ludgate, is it? Does it come out of Ludgate?
Ludgate or Newgate.
Yeah, one of those. But also, off the A4, recently we worked at a school in Hammersmith and we think we found the corner of an oppida.
Oh, that's going to set hairs running. Right. I don't think we'll pursue that one tonight because there are more questions in. Do you think there'll be any more volunteer excavations on the site?
It would be nice, but we really need funding from either the council, who are a bit cash strapped, or HLF, which would be a new bid. And since this came up on the back of improving the park with primarily a new cafe, which hasn't been finished, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah,
and Paul, who runs the park, is very keen on having a look at the motte on the other side of the road. But
it sounds like there's lots of scope, but it sounds like cash might be an issue, as with
lots of scope.
So many. But it also sounds like you've got a bit of writing up to do. I'm going to head over into the chat because I think people have been putting some questions into the chat. Chris Constable is querying that the Bath Road may not be Roman, but the one south of Heathrow to Staines is.
I bow to Chris in everything.
I think we will on that one. And Anne has asked, were the bricks made locally?
It's difficult to prove because they're made of London clay. So you could doing a geomorphological test on the clay. It's London clay. What we would need, I think the family moved to Australia, and if they have any bills left from the 17th century, they'd have taken the papers with them. That might be the only way of actually finding out if there was a local brickworks, is finding the bills of sale.
We have another question in the chat, which is from Jerry. You said that the pottery shards were found in the post holes. How? Why?
I think as the site was abandoned, the broken pottery finds and the like migrate into the post holes. That's where the fills come from, is by migration of topsoil and subsoil into cut features. So just natural subsidence. I don't think they're placing them there out of any deliberate way. It's just we're lucky that the post holes were deep enough for finds to be carried into them as they filled up through natural erosion. So some of the finds won't date from it. Some will be just background noise. But the latest finds in the post holes will tell us the date, hopefully, of the features.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, we have a raised hand from Mike Marriott. Mike, are you able to type your question into the Q&A or the chat box? You may be on a phone, on a train or something, which would be difficult. If you can, please do. And if anyone else has any other questions, please type them in. I'm not seeing anything at the moment. So perhaps we'll hand back to Harvey, who I know wanted to raise a few points about Lammas and its membership.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you, Les, for that talk. Again, it's very, very interesting. I mean, two things that struck me. One, of course, is another example of the prehistoric activity that we see close to the crane and the cone on that low ground. It does seem that we have really big, complex settlements out there, which we obviously collecting information and still got a lot more to do. I think the other thing that struck me was the Barclay family. Could I ask you, Les, is it the same Barclay family that we hear so much about today, the sort of warring, rather right-wing family, or is it a different one?
Berkley.
Right.
It's not the owners of the bank who I think.
No, I wasn't thinking of the owners of the bank. I was thinking of the Barclay brothers, who we see in the news these days. But it was just that was just a
I
slight.
don't think so.
I'm going to stop the recording here. I'm considering libel laws.